Okay, my phone stopped recording again. It's a good thing I wasn't too far, but yeah, so anyway. Crooks, the Negro stable book, had his bunk in the harness room, a little shed that leaned off the wall of the barn. On one side of the little room there was a square 4-pane window, and on the other a narrow plank door leading into the barn. Crook's bunk was a long box filled with straw on which his blankets were flung. On the wall by the window there were pegs on which hung broken harness in process of being mended, strips of new leather, and under the window itself a little bench for leather-working tools, curved knives and needles and balls of linen thread. And a small hand riveter on pegs were also pieces of harness, a split collar with the horsehair stuffing sticking out, a broken hame, and a trace chain with its leather covering split. Crooks had his apple box over his bunk, and in it a range of medicine bottles, both for himself and for the horses. There were cans of saddle soap and a drippy can of tar with its paintbrush sticking over the edge, and scattered about the floor were a number of personal possessions. For being alone, Crooks could leave his things about, and being a stable bug and a cripple, he was more permanent than the other men, and he had accumulated more possessions than he could carry on his back. Crooks possessed several pairs of shoes, a pair of rubber boots, a big alarm clock, and a single-barreled shotgun, and he had books too, a tattered dictionary and a mauled copy of the California Civil Code for 1905. There were battered magazines and a few dirty books on a special shelf over his bunk. A pair of large gold-rimmed spectacles hung from a nail on the wall above his bed. This room was swept fairly neat, for Crooks was a proud, aloof man. He kept his distance and demanded that other people keep theirs. His body was bent over to the left by his crooked spine, and his eyes lay deep in his head, and because of their depth seemed to glitter with intensity. His lean face was lined with deep black wrinkles, and he had thin, pain-tightened lips which were lighter than his face. It was Saturday night. Through the open door that led into the barn came the sound of moving horses, of feet stirring, of teeth champing on hay, of the rattle of halter chains. In the stable book's room a small electric globe threw a meager yellow light. Crooks sat on his bunk. His shirt was out of his jeans and back. In one hand he held a bottle of liniment, and with the other he rubbed his spine. Now and then he poured a few drops of the liniment into his pink-palmed hand and reached up under his shirt to rub again. He flexed his muscles against his back and shivered. Noiselessly, Lenny appeared in the open doorway and stood there looking in, his big shoulders nearly filling the opening. For a moment Crooks did not see him, but on raising his eyes he stiffened and a scowl came on his face. His hand came out from under his shirt. Then he smiled helplessly in an attempt to make friends. Crooks said sharply, "You got no right to come in my room. This here's my room. Nobody got any right in here but me." Then he gulped and his smile grew more fawning. "I ain't doing nothing," he said. "Just come to look at my puppy, and I seen your light," he explained. "But I got a right to have a light. You go on and get out of my room. I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse, and you ain't wanted in my room." "Why ain't you wanted?" Lenny asked. "'Cause I'm black. They play cards in there, but I can't play because I'm black. They say I stink. Well, I tell you, all you stink to me." Then he flapped his big hands helplessly. "Everybody went into town," he said. "Slim and George and everybody. George says I gotta stay here and not get in no trouble. I seen your light." "Well, what do you want?" "Nothing. I seen your light. I thought I could just come in and sit." Crooks stared at Lenny, and he reached behind him and took down the spectacles and adjusted them over his pink ears and stared again. "I don't know what you're doing in the barn anyway," he complained. "You ain't no Skinner. There's no call for a bucker to come into the barn at all. You ain't no Skinner. You ain't got nothing to do with the horses." "The pup," Lenny repeated. "I come to see my pup." "Well, go see your pup then. Don't come in a place where you're not wanted." Lenny lost his smile. He advanced a step into the room and remembered him back to the door again. "I looked down my little," Slim says. "I ain't to pet him very much." Crick said, "Well, you've been taking him out of the nest all the time. I wonder the old lady don't move him someplace else." "Oh, she don't care. She lets me," Lenny had moved into the room again. Crook scowled, but Lenny's disarming smile defeated him. "Come on in and sit a while," Crook said. "Long as you won't get out and leave him alone. Long as you won't go out and leave me alone. Long as you won't go out and leave me. Long as you won't get out and leave me alone." Or like he said, "Go, whatever, sit down. As long as you won't get out and leave me alone, you might as well sit down." His tone was a little more friendly. "All the boys gone into town, huh?" "All but old Candy. He just sits in the bunkhouse sharpening his pencil and sharpening and figuring." Crooks adjusted his glasses. "Figuring? What's Candy figuring about?" Lenny almost shouted. "About the rabbits." "You're nuts," said Crooks. "You're crazy as a wedge. What rabbits are you talking about?" "The rabbits we're going to get, and I got to tend them. Cut grass and give them water and like that." Fucking Lenny. "Just nuts," said Crooks. "I don't blame the guy you travel with for keeping you out of sight." Lenny said quietly, "Ain't no liar. We're going to do it. Going to get a little place and live on the fat of the land." Crooks settled himself more comfortably on his bunk. "Sit down," he invited. "Sit down on the nail keg." Lenny hunched down on the little barrel. "You think it's a lie?" Lenny said. "But ain't no lie. Every word's the truth, and you can ask George." Crooks put his dark chin into his pink palm. "You travel around with George, don't you?" "Sure. Me and him goes everywhere place together." Crooks continued. Sometimes he talks and you don't know what the hell he's talking about. Ain't that so? He leaned over and boring Lenny with his deep eyes. Ain't that so? Yeah, sometimes. Just talks on. You don't know what the hell it's all about. Yeah, sometimes, but not always. Crook leaned forward over the edge of the bunk. I ain't a Southern Negro, he said. I was born right here in California. My old man had a chicken ranch, about 10 acres. The white kids come to play at our place, and sometimes I went to play with them, and some of them was pretty nice. My old man didn't like that. I never knew too long later why he didn't like that, but I know now. He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. There wasn't another colored family for miles around. Now there ain't a colored man on this ranch, and there's just one family in Solidarity left. Why say something? Why, it's just a black man saying that. Then he asked, how long do you think it'll be before the pups will be old enough to pet? Crooks laughed again. A guy can talk to you and be sure you won't go babbling. A couple of weeks and then pups will be all right. A guy can talk to you and be sure you won't go babbling. A couple of weeks and the pups will be all right. George knows what he's about. Just talks. George knows what he's about. Just talks and you don't understand nothing. He leaned forward excitedly. This is just the N-word talking and a busted back N-word, so it don't mean nothing, see? You couldn't remember it anyways. I seen it over and over. A guy talking to another guy, and it don't make no difference if we don't hear or understand. The thing is, they're talking, and they're sitting still not talking. It don't make no difference, no difference. I don't know if he's being like, saying like, oh, I just hear the story all the time, or he's trying to get information to be a hater of it. His excitement had increased until he pounded his knee with his hand. George can tell you screwy things and it don't matter. It's just the talking. It's just being with another guy. That's all. He paused. His voice grew soft and persuasive. Suppose George don't come back no more. Suppose he took a powder and just ain't coming back. What do you do then? Then his attention came gradually to what had been said. What? He demanded. I said, suppose George went into town tonight. You never heard of him no more. Crook pressed forward some kind of private victory. Crooks pressed forward some kind of private victory. Just suppose that, he repeated. He won't do it, then he cried. George wouldn't do nothing like that. I've been with George a long time. He'll come back tonight. But the doubt was too much for him. Don't you think he will? Crook's face lighted with pleasure in his torture. Nobody can tell what a guy will do, he observed calmly. Let's say he wants to come back and can't. Suppose he gets killed or hurt, so he can't come back. Then he struggled to understand. George won't do nothing like that, he repeated. George is careful. He won't get hurt. He ain't never been hurt because he's careful. Well, just suppose you don't come back. What do you do then? Lenny's face wrinkled with apprehension. I don't know. Say, what are you doing anyways? He cried. This ain't true. George ain't got hurt. Crooks bored in on him. Want me to tell you what'll happen? They'll take you to the booby hatch. They'll tie you up with the collar like a dog. Suddenly, Lenny's eyes centered and grew quiet and mad. He stood up and walked dangerously toward Crooks. Who hurt George? He demanded. Crooks saw the danger as it approached him. He edged back on his bunk to get out the way. I was just supposing, he said. George ain't hurt. He's all right. He'll be back all right. Then he stood over him. What are you supposing for? Ain't nobody going to suppose no hurt to George. Crooks removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with his fingers. Just sit down, he said. George ain't hurt. Then he growled back to his seat on the nail keg. Ain't nobody going to talk no hurt to George, he grumbled. Crooks said gently, maybe you can see now. You got George. You know he's going to come back. Suppose you didn't have nobody. Suppose you couldn't get into the bunkhouse and play rummy because he was black. How do you like that? Suppose you had to sit out here and read books. Sure, you could play horseshoes till it got dark, but then you got to read books. Books ain't no good. A guy needs somebody to be near him. He whined. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. Don't make no difference who the guy is. Long he's with you, I tell you, he cried. I tell you, guys get too lonely and he gets sick. I tell you, a guy gets too lonely and he gets sick. George gonna come back, Lenny reassured himself in a fine voice. Maybe George come back already. Maybe I better go see. Crook said, I didn't mean to scare you. He'll come back. I was talking about myself. A guy sits alone out here at night, maybe reading books or thinking or stuff like that. Sometimes he gets thinking and he got nothing to tell him what's so in and what ain't so. What's so in and what ain't so. Maybe if he sees something, he don't know whether it's right or not. He can turn to some other guy and ask him if he sees it too. He can tell. He got nothing to measure by. I see things out here. He got nothing to measure by. I seen things out here. I wasn't drunk. I don't know if I was asleep. If some guy was with me, he could tell me if I was asleep. And then it would be all right. But I just don't know. Crooks was looking across the room now, looking toward the window. Then he said miserably, George won't go away and leave me. I know George won't do that. The stable buck went on dreamily. I remember when I was a little kid on my old man's chicken ranch. Had two brothers. They was always near me, always there. Used to sleep right in the same room, right in the same bed, all three. Had a strawberry patch, had an alfalfa patch. Used to turn the chickens out into the alfalfa on a Sunday morning. My brothers sat on a fence rail and watched them. White chickens they was. Gradually, Lenny's interest came around to what was being said. George says we're gonna have alfalfa for rabbits. What rabbits? We're gonna have rabbits on a berry patch. You're nuts. We are too. You asked George. You're nuts, Crooks was scornful. I seen hundreds of men come by on the road and on the ranches with their bindles on their back and the same damn thing in their heads. Hundreds of them. They come and they quit and they go. And every damn one of them's got a little piece of land in his head. And every goddamn one of them ever gets it, just like heaven. Everybody wants a little piece of land. I read plenty of books out there. Nobody never gets to heaven. Nobody gets no land. It's just in their head. They're all the time talking about it, but it's just in their head. He paused and looked toward the open door, for the horses were moving restlessly and the halter chains clinked. A horse whinnied. I guess somebody's out there, Crook said. Maybe Slim. Slim comes in sometimes 2-3 times a night. Slim's a real skinner. He looks out for his team. He pulled himself painfully upright and moved toward the door. That's you, Slim, he recalled. Kenny's voice answered. Slim went in town. Say you seen Lenny? Yeah, I mean the big guy? Yeah, seen him around any place? He's in here, Crook said shortly. He went back to his bunk and lay down. Kenny stood in the doorway, scratching his bald wrist and looking blindly into the lighted room. He made no attempt to enter. Tell you what, Lenny, I've been figuring out about them rabbits, Crook said irritably. You can come in if you want. Kenny seemed embarrassed. I don't know, of course, if you want me to. Come on in. If everybody's coming in, you might just as well. It was difficult for Crooks to conceal his pleasure with anger. Kenny came in, but he was still embarrassed. You got a nice, cozy little place in here, he said to Crooks, but it must be nice to have a room all yourselves this way. Sure, he said, Crooks, in a manure pile under the window. Sure, it's swell. Then he broke in. You said about them rabbits. Kenny leaned against the wall beside the broken collar while he scratched the wrist stump. I've been here a long time, he said. Crook's been here a long time. The first time I ever been in his room. It's the first time I've been in his room. Crook said darkly, guys don't come into a colored man's room very much. Nobody been here but Slim and the boss. Kenny quickly changed the subject. Slim's as good a skinner as I ever seen. Then he leaned toward the old swamper. About them rabbits, he insisted. Kenny smiled. I got to figure it out. We can make some money on them rabbits if we go about it right. But I get to tend them, then he broke in. George says I get to tend them, he promised. Crooks interrupted brutally. You guys are just kidding yourselves. You talk about it a hell of a lot, but you won't get no land. You'll be a swamper here till they take you out in a box. Hell, I seen too many guys. Lenny Hero quit and be on the road in 2-3 weeks. Seems like every guy got land in his head. Kenny rubbed his cheek angrily. You goddamn right we're gonna do it. George says we are. We got the money right now. Yeah, said Crooks. And where's George now? In town in a whorehouse? That's where your money's going. Jesus, I seen it happen too many times. I seen too many guys with the land in their head. They never get none under their hand. Kenny cried. Sure, they all want it. Everybody wants a little bit of land, not much, just something that was his, something he could live on, and there wouldn't be nobody to throw him off of it. I never had none. I planted crops for damn near everybody in the state, but it wasn't my crops, and when I harvested them, it was none of my harvest, but we got to do it now, and don't make no mistake about that. George ain't got the money in town. The money's in the bank. Me and Lenny and George, we're going to have a room of ourselves. We're going to have a dog and rabbits and chickens. We're going to have green corn and maybe a cow or goat. He stopped overwhelmed with this picture. Crook asked, you say you got the money? Damn right, we got most of it. It's a bit more to get it. Have it all in 1 month. George got the land all picked out, too. I don't know why they said anything. Crooks reached around and explored his spine with his hand. I never seen a guy really do it, he said. I seen guys nearly crazy with loneliness for land, but every time a whorehouse or a blackjack game took what it takes. He hesitated. If you guys would want a hand to work for nothing, just his keep, well, I'd come and lend a hand. I ain't so crippled. I can work like a son of a bitch if I want to. Any of you boys seen Curly? They swing their heads toward the door looking. It was Curly's wife. Her face was heavily made up. Her lips were slightly parted. She breathed strongly as though she had been running. Curly ain't been in here, Candy, he said sourly. She stood still in the doorway, smiling a little at them, rubbing the nails of one hand with the thumb and the forefinger of the other, and her eyes traveled from one face to the other. They left all the weak ones here, she said finally. Think I don't know where they all went? Even Curly, I know where they all went. Then he watched her fascinated, but Candy and Crooks were scowling down away from her eyes.